Hi, I'm Jean Nolte, editor at Fons and Porter.
And I'm Colleen Tauke. I'm the sewing specialist at Fons and Porter. In this Sew Easy, we will show you how to put on binding using plush fabric.
So this is really not as hard as you might think, although I know a lot of people are a little nervous about this.
Yeah, it's a stretchy fabric, so what do?
Well, it's very similar to binding on any quilt, but we're going to cut the strips 2 inches wide and we're not going to fold them in half. So the first thing we're going to do is take our 2-inch strip, and I have a 2-inch strip of lightweight fusible interfacing, and we're going to put that right on top of there, and then you're just going to press that on. You'll want to follow the manufacturer's instructions for iron temperature and an amount of time. Anyway,
exactly.
I'm not going to go ahead and do the whole thing. But you would fuse the entire length of your binding strips, and if your interfacing is shorter than your binding, you would just stop and then put another piece butted up to it and keep going.
The whole idea of working with a plush fabric is that it's stretchy. So we're applying that fusible to the back to give it some stability, because the outside edge of our quilt, the finishing line, we want it to look good. So when we've gone ahead and stabilized all of our strips, we're going to join them to make our bindings. Now, plush fabric tends to have what we call a nap. It's a direction of that soft velvet. And so what we want to do is when we get done joining all these, we want them to all feel like they're brushed in the same direction. So you're going to have to pet your fabric. You will notice if you go against it, you'll change the color. And we want all that binding to look the same, consistent. So we're going to line them up so that they are all going nap in the same direction, and then join your binding strips the same way you would do with regular, in your regular quilt binding construction. You're going to draw a diagonal across there, and on this you're going to need some pins. Because the plushness, the thickness of that fabric, one will want to walk away from you as you put it under the sewing machine.
So do you do all your sewing on this plush fabric with a walking foot?
Yeah, walking foot is your best friend, because the two are going to be right sides together at this point, and that plush makes a slide.
It wiggles a little bit.
The presser foot, your regular presser foot just drags along, and your walking foot will give pressure and help feed both layers, top and the bottom, along evenly, so you get a really good product in the end.
So you'll have a nice straight binding strip.
Exactly.
When you're done, one won't stick up higher than the other.
Yeah, we want it to be a straight strip when we're done. So what we're going to do then is go ahead and just stitch like you normally do when you make binding, diagonally seaming these together. Okay. We're using bright red thread. You wouldn't do that at home. You would use probably a more neutral colored thread. And then when you get done, you open it up, and you'll make sure that one last feel that everything's going in the same direction, nap, and you'll notice how nice and parallel the outer cut edges are now. And then you can go in and open up that seam allowance and trim away the excess, because everything's about bulk.
It's just a little too thick to have all that in there.
Yeah, exactly. So we open that up, trim away the extra triangles, and link all of the binding required for your project.
Get all of your binding strips into one long strip.
Now we're ready to attach the binding to our quilt project. Now, when you go to set up your machine using plush, you should set your stitch length. Normally you have it at about a 2.0. Take it to about a 3.5, because if you have to take the stitching out at any point, you want to be able to find the stitches.
You'll be a lot happier with that longer stitch.
They kind of get themselves embedded in the plush, and a longer stitch length goes quicker, and you can see your stitches much more easily. So then we're going to apply binding the same way, seemingly, that we would do when we make a quilt, except that we're going to apply it to the back of the quilt.
Right.
Normally we apply to the front. We're going to flip it over, leaving a long tail like you do when
about 12 inches.
When you're regularly putting binding on. We're going to start like this.
Start not at a corner. Start out in the middle.
Somewhere on the side. Yeah, never in a corner. That's just too tight of an area to work. And now, of course, with this, we're going to use 1/2-inch seam allowance. And plush fabrics are very thick, and so a 1/4 inch is very hard to ride right next to. So you're going to want 1/2 inch seam allowance.
And we've cut the binding a width that will accommodate that 1/2 inch seam allowance. so-
Exactly. Okay. So we're going to sew right down into the corner. We have the right side of our binding to the back side of our quilt. And we're going to stitch along.
One of the things that we do is we bind our plush quilts with flannel because another layer of the plush fabric is just awfully thick.
Okay, stop about 1/2 inch from the end. Break thread, take it out of the machine. And just like you would do your miter corner that you normally do on a quilt, flip it up and away.
Diagonal.
Make that diagonal line into the corner. Flip it back down, aligning the cut edge of the binding to the quilt top. Remember, 1/2 inch seam allowance. You're going to put it back into the machine. And you're going to start at the very outer top edge of the quilt and stitch downward.
It's pretty thick getting through that first little part at the corner where you got all those layers.
Yep, but
it'll do it.
The walking foot is your friend on this project. Okay, we're going to take it out so you can see what that corner is going to look like. And you would just go ahead and proceed and repeat that corner process on all 4 corners.
Right. So now we have one that actually has
All 4 corners.
all 4 corners done, but we still have the long tails.
Now we have to do the joining.
So we're going to just kind of take it to the middle.
Very similar method that you do. Normally you would have folded binding. This is open, so it's the same process.
But it's the same thing. Leave a 1/4 of an inch. I'm going to try and put a little
Have a crease in it.
crease there, and I'm going to just make a line. It's in the center.
Yep.
Okay, now I'm going to do the same thing with this side.
It seems like it's such a little thing, but it's really important to mark that fold back. And then there's one more thing we want you to do is to go in and divide down so you have like a crosshairs in the very center of each strip of binding.
Basically like a little X. So this
X
is
marks
2 inches.
spot.
You're right, 2 inches wide. So I make a line at 1 inch going across that first one.
Okay.
So now we need to make the diagonals, and we need to make them both go the same way. So you're going to take a little ruler works much better than a big ruler. And you see the diagonal line. I'm going to put that 45-degree angle line right across the bottom of the binding, and the edge of it is going to touch where those 2 lines make that X. I'm going to draw a line all the way across my binding, and I hope you'll be able to see it.
It just needs to be enough of a line for a stitch on.
All right, now I need to do the same thing over here, and I have to be very careful to make sure that they go the same direction.
You only do it once wrong, and then after that, you remember they all have to slant the same way.
It just doesn't work if you don't go the same direction. So you can see that both of them slant the same direction. So now you're ready to join those 2 strips.
So what you're going to want to do is put a pin into the center of that crosshairs. It'll give you a way to match those up.
Okay, and they should end up perpendicular or crosswise to one another.
And if you've got them overlapped, the tails overlapped like this, you'll notice if I swing that over, that diagonal line that Jean drew is right at that intersection. It's going to be right at this one. So then a couple of pins. Remember, this stuff will want to walk away from you as you're sewing. So we're going to...
It's important to pin this.
Yeah.
And I do that with regular binding too.
Okay.
Just to hold it because it's awkward.
And if you let go of it, you'll notice it's starting to fit back in place. So you're on the right track. It's a really good feeling to say, ooh, I know it's going to fit. And you're going to take that under the machine and you're going to sew that diagonal just like you do on normal binding. Make sure it slides over there. It's a little bit of a wrestle to get it right under the machine lined up, but you're going to sew on just on your drawn line, and you're almost there. Okay, so right across, right into that V. And we have one.
All right. Now you'll want to check that to make sure before you trim it off.
You're going to want to make sure that it fits down against your quilt top. You notice, look at how that's nice and fitting in there. And then you can go ahead and trim away those long tails. They can be gone. And we're going to have to close up that last little piece, that little jump between that you left where your tails were at. And when you get done, it's stitched all the way around. Now it's looking pretty good. Now the last piece.
So
we
now,
need to go in and roll our binding then to the front. And we are going to finish it with a zigzag stitch. As the first time I did this, I thought, why would I want a zigzag stitch on plush? But you will notice it's going to become quite invisible. Okay, and we're going to make our width of our stitch fairly narrow. Take it down to about a 2.0 or so. Okay, now we're going to roll.
And you would use matching thread,
yeah,
the color of the binding.
Yeah, I would use a light blue, or I've even used gray on this, and it gets so embedded in the plush that it just goes away.
I think you're going to be surprised how much the red disappears when you sew this.
So we're going to be rolling this to this stitching line. I'll put it on here so you can see it better. There's a black stitching line there where I put it on before, and we're going to roll that cut edge right over the top.
Just covers that.
Just to it, not way over it, not back off and leave the stitching, but just to it.
So
and this is where, again, the walking foot is your friend.
right.
And we're going to zigzag just off the cut edge and back into
So the left side of the stitch is going to go just off the edge.
Exactly.
And the right side of the stitch is going to be on the binding.
And you're going to proceed like that all the way around. Because it's stabilized now at this point, it doesn't have much stretch
really
to it.
isn't
You're going to get a
stretchy.
really nice finished edge.
Also, the instructions tell you to cut the interfacing on the lengthwise grain, which makes it more stable, and that's important.
And you will see already that that zigzag stitch is almost
almost invisible, and it's red on blue.
Now, the same thing, you're going to do the same kind of thing when you come into your corner as you do when you're hand stitching your a mitered corner. We're going to line this up just for the corner and show you how we can get into that. Same way, we would come in and stitch.
Just up to your line.
And then kind of lodge our stitches. Just take a couple in place. Break thread. We're going to take it out so we can fold this, tucking it over. And take it right into the machine. The first time I did this, I thought, wow, this is more fun than I ever thought I would have.
It's really not as hard as everybody seems to think that it is. If you just try it.
You want to bind with a plush fabric? Are you crazy? No, it's fun, and everybody loves the feel of it.
Right, and you can experiment with your stitch width and length to just see how you like it.
Every machine is a little bit unique, but there we go. So nice and mitered.
And then
it embeds itself on the back side,
it's really
too,
hidden on the back too.
And if you want to, those stitches.
Just trim your threads here.
Yeah, you trim your threads away, and if you just roll your fingernail across it, the plush fabric comes out and hides your stitching.
And if that
beautifully.
if that were matching thread, it would be totally invisible.
Gone. Exactly. Thanks for joining us today.
To see more of our Sew Easy videos, go to fonsandporter.com.